This video is going to talk about a ratio table. And a ratio table is a table that shows you rates that look different but actually mean the same thing, because each one of the rates in a ratio table simplified down to the same ratio. So let's use an example where you have a recipe that has 5 cups of water for every cup of black beans that you use. So, for example, instead of 5 cups, let's double the recipe. Let's make it twice as big. Because when you work with rates, whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom, the same thing as with fractions. When we multiply by 2, what you're going to notice is that 5 times 2 is 10. 1 times 2 is 2. And what you have there is the same ratio, because when you divide by 2, you go back to that base unit rate. Let's triple the recipe. Let's see what happens when we multiply by 3. 5 times 3 is 15. 1 times 3 is 3. You can kind of start to see a pattern going on here. But the question is, what happens if our recipe, what happens if it needs 5 cups of black beans? If we have 5 cups of black beans, how much water do we need? Well, first we need to figure out how did we go from 1 cup to 5 cups using multiplication or division. Well, to get from 1 to 5, you have to multiply times 5. And if you multiply times 5 on the bottom, then you have to do the same on the top. So we're going to take that 5 and we're going to multiply times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. So if you have 5 cups of black beans, you're going to need 25 cups of water. Let's take a look at another example, which is really well hidden down here. And let's go ahead and look at orange blossoms. If you have 10 orange blossoms, and there's 50 petals total, and each of the orange blossoms has the same amount of petals on it, we want to know how many petals are on one orange blossom. And to figure that out, you need to figure out how you went from 10 to 1 using multiplication or division. And to go from 10 to 1, you divided by 10. And if you divide by 10 on the bottom, you have to divide by 10 on the top. 50 divided by 10 is going to be 5. So if there's 1 orange blossom, there's going to be 50 petals on that. The same as 10 orange blossoms will have 50 petals. 1 orange blossom has 5 petals. 10 orange blossoms has 50 petals. Your first question for Google Form is going to be a little bit of a challenge, so I will be putting the picture on Google Form as well. But we're going to talk about patient X. Patient X is going to receive 1 liter of IV fluids every 8 hours. So you can see that ratio there, 1 liter every 8 hours. The question is, how long will it take them to receive 4 liters of IV fluids? So you need to figure out how are you adjusting this top number, and what does that mean for how you adjust the bottom number. And again, this will be on the form. What we talked about here is pretty simple in how to adjust ratios. We've been using just multiplication. But sometimes, and we're going to switch you over here, sometimes what you're going to notice is you're going to need to scale the ratio. So, for example, if we are figuring out how much fabric we need, how many yards of fabric we need to make a shirt, we know from experience that 12 yards of fabric will make 10 shirts. The question is, how many shirts can we make out of 20 yards of fabric? Using our ratio tables, we're going to have to divide before we can multiply. So let's go ahead and figure out what we can do here. What we're going to do is we're going to simplify. We're going to treat this just like a fraction. So if you have the fraction 12 over 9, Even though this is an improper fraction and the bigger number's on the top, we're going to let it go for right now because we're looking at a ratio, and that's going to compare two things. So what can we divide this by? Well, I know that 3 goes into 9 and into 12, so let's try dividing by that and see what happens. 12 divided by 3 is 4. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And looking at 4/3, I can't think of any number that I can evenly divide those two numbers by. So that's what we're going to put back up here. If you were to show your work in the table, you would have shown dividing by 3. Now that we have our 4/3, we're going to go from this number to get over here. So what's going to happen is, how did we go from 4 to 20 using multiplication or division? Well, I know that I want to use a different color. I know that 4 times 5 is 20, so I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom and multiply 3 times 5. 3 times 5 is 15. So if I have 20 yards of fabric, I can make 15 shirts. The second question that's going to be on Google Forms, and again, you'll see the picture up there, is going to talk about, wow, that got a little bit scraped up, my apologies, is going to talk about Joey and his lawn mowing business. Now, in 14 hours, Joey can mow 8 lawns. We want to know how many lawns can Joey mow in 49 hours. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to divide this first to get to a more simplified answer, and then multiply to figure out what that final answer is. So you're going to go ahead, you're going to solve this answer on Forms, be as specific as you can with what you're doing, but don't worry about recreating any of the tables.